Shoot her, right now, before she opens her mouth. Victor Hayes said it into the phone like he was ordering room service. Cold, flat, completely certain. Outside, 32 Navy SEALs were pinned down under live fire in the Nevada desert, bleeding into the dirt. And the most powerful man in the room wasn't calling for help. He was calling for a kill order on a woman his own people had already declared dead 2 years ago. A woman who was currently the only thing standing between 32 soldiers and a shallow grave. A woman nobody at Black Ridge had looked at twice. Until today. Before we go any further, if this story hits you the way it hit me, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. She wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thing anyone would tell you later after everything happened, after the dust settled and the reports were filed and people started asking the hard questions nobody had thought to ask before. The investigators, the journalists, even the SEAL operators themselves, they all said the same thing when they look back on those 3 days at Black Ridge Training Facility. She wasn't supposed to be there. And if she hadn't been, 32 men would have died in the Nevada desert on a Tuesday afternoon in an operation that would have been classified so fast the families would have spent years wondering what really happened. But she was there, and nobody saw her coming. Her name on the roster was Emma Carter, 27 years old, civilian combat medic, 5 feet 3 inches tall on a good day. Brown hair she kept pulled back tight because loose hair in a field environment was a liability, and Emma Carter did not do liabilities. Her file was clean, unremarkable. She had worked 3 previous joint training exercises, 2 in Arizona, 1 in Texas. Her supervisor reviews all said the same things. Competent, reliable, stays in her lane. Nobody's idea of remarkable. That was exactly the point. She arrived at Black Ridge on a Monday, drove herself in a dusty Jeep she'd borrowed from a man named James Whitmore, parked it in the civilian vehicle lot, and carried her gear to the medical support tent without asking anyone for help. The SEAL operators noticed her the way they noticed most support staff. They didn't. She was part of the backdrop, part of the infrastructure, the kind of person you're grateful exists when something goes wrong and completely forget about when everything's going right. For 3 days she worked. She triaged simulated injuries during morning exercises. She logged medications. She kept her equipment organized in a way that suggested either military training or an obsessive personality, and nobody asked which. She ate her meals alone. She kept to herself. She was polite when spoken to and quiet when not. And every single night after the tent went quiet and the operators were running their equipment checks and debriefs, Emma Carter sat in her vehicle for exactly 45 minutes and stared at a photograph. It was a photograph of her father, Master Sergeant Daniel Carter, United States Army, Special Forces, retired, deceased. The photograph was old enough that the edges had started to yellow. He was in civilian clothes in the picture, standing in front of a mountain range she'd never been able to identify. He was smiling. He had the kind of smile that took up his whole face, the kind that started in his eyes before it ever reached his mouth. She had his eyes. People used to tell her that all the time when she was young, before she learned to avoid people who knew him. She had his patience too, and his aim. But nobody at Black Ridge knew any of that yet. The SEAL team was led by Petty Officer Ryan Mitchell, and if you were going to pick one word to describe Ryan Mitchell, it would be thorough. He ran his team like a machine. Not a cold machine. He cared about his people in the way that good military leaders care deeply and quietly, in the way that never announces itself. But thorough. He ran his team with a level of precision and attention to detail that had kept all of them alive through 3 combat deployments and more training exercises than any of them could accurately count. He'd looked at Emma Carter's file before the exercise started. 30 seconds. He'd noted her qualifications, noted she'd worked joint exercises before and moved on. She was support staff. She was covered. He had other things to think about. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the exercise they were about to run was not as controlled as it appeared. Atlas Defense Systems had 3 representatives at Black Ridge. Their names on the official manifest were Michael Chen, Operations Liaison, Sandra Walsh, Technical Advisor, and Robert Pace, Site Security Coordinator. They were there to observe a demonstration of new battlefield communications technology that Atlas had developed under a classified Department of Defense contract. The technology was worth, depending on who you ask, somewhere between $40 and $60 million. The kind of number that makes people do things they wouldn't otherwise do. Emma had known Atlas Defense Systems was connected to this exercise before she agreed to come. That was why she agreed to come. James Whitmore had found her 8 months earlier. She'd been working as a medic for a mining company in Montana, living in a town small enough that strangers were noticed and remembered, which was why she'd chosen it. She drove a practical truck, wore practical clothes, and told people her name was Emma Reed. It wasn't, but it had been briefly under circumstances she didn't talk about. Whitmore found her because Whitmore was good at finding people. He'd spent 30 years in military intelligence before he retired, and retirement, as far as Emma could tell, hadn't slowed him down much. He was 71 years old and he still moved like a man, expecting trouble. He showed up at the medical clinic where she worked on a Thursday afternoon, sat down in the waiting room, and when she came out to call the next patient, he just looked at her. "Your father would have been 70 this year," he said. She almost walked back into the exam room. She almost pretended she hadn't heard him. She almost did a lot of things that would have been smarter and safer and that she would have been incapable of doing, because James Whitmore had known her father, and he was the first person in 4 years who had looked at her and known who she actually was. She took him to her truck instead. They sat in the parking lot and she said, "You shouldn't have come here." "No," he agreed, "but I needed to." He told her about Black Ridge. He told her about the Atlas Defense connection. He explained that he had reason to believe, and Whitmore, she knew, did not use phrases like reason to believe lightly, that the Black Ridge exercise was being used as cover for something else, something that connected directly back to the operation in which her father had died. "They're going to move equipment," he said, "classified research. The exercise is a distraction. A distraction for who? For the people who don't know what Atlas is actually doing." He paused. "Which is everyone except the people running it." She stared through the windshield for a long time. "If I go," she said, "I go as a medic." "I know. I'm not going as anything else." Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not asking you to go as anything else." That was true. He wasn't asking her to go as a soldier or an operative or whatever she had been during the years that were still officially classified. He was asking her to go as Emma Carter's civilian combat medic, to keep her eyes open, to be in the right place if things went wrong. She knew, sitting in that parking lot in Montana, that things would go wrong. Things always went wrong when Atlas Defense Systems was involved. She knew that the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds actually arrive, you can feel it in the pressure change, in the quality of the light, in the way the air tastes different. She agreed because she had been waiting for 4 years. 4 years of living under names that weren't hers in towns where nobody knew her, doing work that used 10% of what she was capable of, while the other 90% sat quiet and patient and furious, somewhere just below the surface. Her father had not died in an accident. She had known that for 4 years. She had never been able to prove it, but she was going to. She spent the first 2 days at Black Ridge doing exactly what her file said she would do. She was the medic. She stayed in the medical tent. She triaged simulated injuries and logged medications and kept her equipment organized and ate her meals alone. And she watched. She watched the Atlas representatives more than she watched anything else. Michael Chen spent most of his time on his phone. He was careful about it. He stepped away from the group. When he made calls, he kept his voice low. He watched the people around him, but he wasn't careful enough. Emma had been trained to observe people by someone who had spent his entire career making observations that other people missed. She noticed the timing of his calls. She noticed the directions he faced when he made them. She noticed that he never called at the same time twice, which meant he was following a protocol, and protocols meant coordination. And coordination meant there were more people involved than the 3 on the manifest. Sandra Walsh was different. Walsh was a technician by temperament. She focused on the equipment, on the specifications, on the technical details of the demonstration. And when she wasn't focused on those things, she was focused on logistics. She had a tablet she carried everywhere, and the tablet was always open to what appeared to be technical schematics. Appeared to be because Emma had spent enough time around technical schematics to recognize when something wasn't quite adding up in the margins. Robert Pace was the one that kept her up at night. Pace was site security coordinator, which at an exercise like this meant he was responsible for perimeter security, access control, and coordination with the base security team. He was good at his job. He was professional, organized, technically competent, and he paid attention to things that most people ignored. He reminded Emma of certain people she'd worked alongside years ago in contexts she still wasn't supposed to discuss. He reminded her of them in the specific, uncomfortable way that made her trust him less, not more. On the second night, she saw him make a phone call from the east side of the vehicle lot facing the ridgeline, the same ridgeline she'd been studying since she arrived. She'd been studying it because she'd been trained to study high ground automatically, the way you're trained to check your six every time you enter a room, the way certain habits get so deep into your nervous system that they stop feeling like habits and start feeling like instinct. The ridgeline was the only position within range that offered full visibility of the training ground below. If you were going to put a shooter somewhere, that's where you'd put them. She didn't let herself think about that too hard. Not yet. She went back to the medical tent and organized her supplies in the dark because she knew exactly where everything was, and she didn't need light to do it, and she told herself she was being paranoid, and she almost believed herself. On the morning of the third day, Ryan Mitchell called his team together for the pre-mission brief. Emma was present because she was support staff, and support staff attended briefings when they were medically relevant. She sat at the back of the tent, and she listened to Mitchell outline the exercise parameters, and she kept her face neutral while he laid out the security protocols, the communication procedures, and the timeline. The timeline was wrong. Not wrong in a way that anyone else would have noticed. Wrong in a subtle, specific way that only made sense if you understood that someone had planned a second operation running parallel to the training exercise, an operation that required a 15-minute window during which the SEAL team would be in the northeast quadrant and the Atlas equipment would be in the staging area with minimal security. 15 minutes. She thought about Pace and his phone call. She thought about Chen and his careful rotating call schedule. She thought about her father and the operation report that said he died in an accident, and the evidence she'd spent 4 years collecting that said he died because he'd uncovered something someone needed buried. She thought about Whitmore saying they're going to move equipment. She almost went to Mitchell right then. Almost. But she had no proof. She had observations and instincts and 4 years of grief and rage, and those were not things you walked up to a SEAL team leader with on the morning of an exercise and said, "Sir, I think someone on this base is running a covert extraction operation under cover of your training mission." Not without something more solid. Not without risking being removed from the facility before she could find what she'd come here to find. So she waited. She waited because her father had taught her that patience was not the same as passivity, that waiting for the right moment was not weakness, that the hardest thing a soldier ever had to learn, harder than marksmanship, harder than tactics, harder than surviving, physical suffering, was learning the difference between when to act and when to keep still. She waited. The exercise began at 0900. For the first 40 minutes, everything went exactly as briefed. The SEAL team moved through the training ground in 3-element formations. Emma and 2 other medics followed the rear element, staying back far enough to be out of the way and close enough to respond quickly if something happened. The Nevada desert was already hot by 9 in the morning, dry heat that made the air shimmer 10 feet off the ground, and Emma had been in hot environments enough times that she didn't really register it anymore. At 0943, she heard the first shot. Not a training weapon. She knew the difference. Training weapons have a specific, slightly hollow sound to them, a sound that comes from the modified ammunition and the range protocols. What she heard at 0943 was a live round fired from a distance, and she knew it was live, not because of any sophisticated calculation, but because of the simple physical fact that she'd grown up around firearms and spent years training with them, and the sound was different, and her body registered the difference before her conscious mind caught up. She was already moving when the second shot came. The SEAL team was already reacting. These were professionals with thousands of hours of training, and their response was fast and correct. They went to cover, they called out positions, they began returning fire. 2 operators were down before the suppressive fire started. Emma could see them from her position. She moved toward the nearest one. Medics she called because you always called so that other people knew not to shoot in your direction. Moving to wounded. She reached the first man in about 8 seconds. His name was Torres. She'd learned during the first day, Petty Officer 2nd Class Marco Torres, 24 years old, from San Antonio. He'd been hit in the upper right thigh. She had her hands on the wound before she consciously made the decision to move. She pulled his tourniquet from his own kit. She knew where every man's tourniquet was because she'd made a point of learning that on day one, and she applied it with the kind of efficiency that only comes from having done something so many times that it stops feeling like a skill and starts feeling like breathing. Torres, stay with me. What's your name? Torres Marco, Petty Officer Second. Good, you're good. The tourniquet's on. You're good. She didn't tell him it was bad. She didn't tell him she could see from the position and angle of the wound that the round had come within about 2 centimeters of his femoral artery. She told him he was good because he needed to stay calm, and she moved. The second man down was further into the open. That was the problem. He was Petty Officer First Class Kevin Aldrich, senior man in the rear element, and he was down in a position with no cover, and whoever was on that ridge had perfect visibility of that position. She assessed the distance, the cover available, the angle of incoming fire. She moved anyway. Carter, do not. That was Mitchell somewhere to her left, behind cover. She was already moving. She was not running in a straight line. She was moving the way she'd been taught, to move through open ground, under fire angles and changes of direction that made her a harder target, and she was moving fast because she had about 4 seconds of decision-making advantage before the shooter adjusted. She got to Aldrich. He'd been hit in the lower left abdomen. She pressed both hands against it before she'd finished evaluating, because with abdominis wounds, stopping the bleeding was the first and most important thing, and she put her weight into it and said, "Aldrich, I've got you." He looked up at her. His face was gray. "It's bad," he said. "Yeah," she said, because Aldrich was a senior SEAL and he would know if she lied. "But I've got you. You keep breathing. Long, slow breaths. You keep breathing and I'll handle the rest." She worked on him for 45 seconds in the open. 45 seconds feels like a long time when someone is shooting in your direction. Then she got him to the edge of available cover, which took everything she had, because Aldrich was 6 feet tall and 215 pounds, and she was 5'3" and 128. And physics is not sentimental. She got him there. Then she stood up and looked toward the ridge. Mitchell was next to her suddenly. She hadn't heard him move. "You out of your mind," he said, not angry, just present, urgent. "The shooter," she said. She wasn't looking at Mitchell. She was looking at the ridge. "He's not moving." "How do you know?" "Because if he was going to move positions, he would have moved when I crossed that open ground. He didn't. He's locked in. He has a clear angle and good concealment, and he believes his position is secure." She paused. "He's not wrong except for one thing." Mitchell waited. "Wind changed 6 minutes ago, southwest about 11 miles per hour. She pointed. "He's compensating for a northwest wind. You can see it in where his rounds are landing. They're all pulling 3 to 4 inches left of center mass. He hasn't recalculated." Silence. "How long have you been watching the wind?" Mitchell asked. "Since I got here Monday," she said. Another silence. Shorter this time. "You're a medic," he said. "I know." "Then why are you asking for my rifle?" She finally turned and looked at him. He was a big man, Ryan Mitchell. Wide-shouldered, steady-eyed, with the kind of face that had learned not to give things away. Right now it was giving away something. Not fear, something more complicated than fear. Something that looked like the beginning of a question he didn't know how to ask. "Because I am the only person here who can make that shot," she said. "And you know I'm right. Because you've been watching that ridge for 7 minutes, and your shooters haven't been able to get a clean angle, and more of your men are going to get hit if this doesn't stop." He stared at her. "If I'm wrong," she said quietly, "then I'm wrong and you court-martial me and I lose the worst-paying job I've ever had. But I'm not wrong." "One more second." Ryan Mitchell handed her his rifle. She took it. She dropped into position. Her cheek found the stock. Her breathing slowed before she consciously slowed it, because that too was deep enough to be instinct by now. Her father's voice clear as the day she first heard it from a range in Virginia when she was 17 years old, halfway out. "Stop. Wait. Let the moment come to you. Don't go to it." She let the moment come to her. The ridge was still. The dust was moving southwest just as she'd said. She made the correction in her head, not on the scope in her head, because the correction was simple and she didn't need the scope to make it. She saw the small movement behind the rocks. The shooter repositioning. adjusting, preparing for another shot. She fired. The echo rolled across the valley and came back, and then it was quiet. The ridge was still. Not still like before, with that particular quality of stillness that means something is there but not moving. Still in the final complete way. Mitchell's radio crackled. Someone on the ridge was calling in. The shooter was down. Ryan Mitchell turned and looked at Emma Carter. She was already back beside Aldrich, her hands back on his wound, her voice low and steady as she talked him through his breathing. She didn't look up. She just said, "Someone call those medics. He needs surgery in the next 40 minutes." None of the 32 SEALs on the ground at Black Ridge that afternoon said anything for about 5 seconds after the shot. 5 seconds is nothing in ordinary time. In the kind of time that happens on a battlefield, it's long enough for 32 different people to have 32 different thoughts about the same woman. And not one of those thoughts was, "She's just a medic." But what they didn't know yet, what they couldn't know because the emergency response teams were still 20 minutes away and the investigation was still hours away, was that when those medics arrived and began processing the scene, they would run Emma Carter's identification through the standard federal database. And the system would return something that made the lead investigator set down his clipboard and read the screen twice. Because according to every official record in that database, Emma Carter had been dead for 2 years. She had a death certificate, she had a date of death, she had a cause, and she was standing 40 feet away from him, reapplying pressure to a wound and telling a 215-pound Navy SEAL to breathe. The investigator looked from the screen to the woman. I thought about everything he'd just seen. The calm, the precision, the way she'd moved across open ground under fire without hesitation. The shot she'd made with someone else's rifle from a position she'd been holding for less than 20 seconds. He thought about the fact that none of this was in her file. He thought about the fact that someone had gone to a great deal of trouble to make it appear that she didn't exist. And he began to understand that Emma Carter was not what anyone at Black Ridge had thought she was. She wasn't a medic who happened to know how to shoot. She was something else entirely, something that someone somewhere had tried very hard to erase. And she had come back anyway. The lead investigator's name was Garrett Howell, 17 years with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. He had worked fraud cases, weapons theft cases, contractor corruption cases that went so deep into the system that by the time you reached the bottom, you weren't sure the system had a bottom anymore. He was not a man who rattled easily. He rattled now. He read the screen a third time, then a fourth. Then he closed the laptop, opened it again, and read it a fifth time. Because sometimes the only rational response to something irrational is repetition. As if reading the same impossible thing enough times will eventually make it make sense. Emma Carter, date of birth, physical description. All of it matched the woman standing 40 feet away from him with her hands pressed against a wounded man's abdomen. Every detail matched, except for the single line at the bottom of the federal record that said in plain, official, unambiguous language that Emma Carter had died 22 months ago in a car accident outside of Billings, Montana. Howell stood up from the mobile command unit. He walked towards her. She heard him coming. He could tell because her posture changed slightly the way someone's posture changes when they're aware of being approached, but have decided not to turn around yet. Not defensiveness. Something more controlled than defensiveness. She finished what she was doing with the wounded man first, then she stood and turned and looked at Howell with the kind of eyes that have been expecting something for a long time and are not surprised when it finally arrives. "You ran my ID," she said. It wasn't a question. "Emma Carter," Howell said. "Yes." "Date of birth, June 14th, 1997. "Yes." "According to our database," Howell said, keeping his voice level, "you've been dead for 22 months. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She just said, "I know what your database says." "Then you want to explain to me how a dead woman just made a 400-meter shot with a borrowed rifle under live fire?" For the first time, something moved across her face. Not amusement exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that came and went so fast he almost missed it. 430 meters, she said. And the wind was running southwest at 11 miles per hour, so the effective difficulty was closer to 500. Howell stared at her. "You corrected my math," he said. "You had it wrong." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm going to need you to come with me." Aldrich needs surgery in the next 30 minutes, she said. Are your medical teams on scene? They're landing now. Then I'll come with you. She said it the way someone says something when they've already made the decision and the words are just the formal confirmation of something settled. She pulled off her gloves. She checked Aldrich one more time, told the incoming medic exactly what she'd done and what he needed and in what order, and then she walked toward the mobile command unit with Howell like she was walking into a meeting she'd scheduled herself, which in a way she was. Inside the unit, Howell set a recorder on the table. Standard procedure. He watched her look at it and then look at him and then look at the recorder again. She didn't ask him to turn it off. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She just sat down and folded her hands on the table and waited. Start from the beginning, Howell said. Which beginning? She said. Yours. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, they could hear the medical helicopters. They could hear people moving equipment, calling out to each other, the organized chaos of an emergency response team doing its job. She listened to all of it for about 5 seconds, and then she said, My name is Emma Carter. My father was Master Sergeant Daniel Carter, Special Forces, 3rd Group. He died 4 years ago in an operation in northern Mali. The official report said equipment failure. The official report was a lie. Howell kept his face neutral. That's a serious allegation. I know what it is. What evidence do you have? I have 4 years of it, she said. But before we get to that, you should know that what happened out there today was not a training accident and it was not a random attack. Somebody planned it, somebody with inside knowledge of the exercise timeline, the security rotation and the location of the Atlas defense equipment in the staging area. Howell leaned forward slightly. What do you know about Atlas defense? More than they want me to, she said. That's why I'm dead. That was the moment Howell understood that this was not going to be a simple debrief. He reached over and turned off the recorder, she noticed. That's not standard procedure, she said. No, he agreed, it's not. He looked at her steadily. If what you're saying is true, if Atlas defense is connected to what happened today, then there are people in this system who I don't know are compromised. And a recording that goes into the standard archive is a recording that certain people can access. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who has spent a long time operating in a world where the map has no reliable landmarks and has just identified one thing that might be solid ground. Victor Hayes, she said. Howell's jaw tightened. She saw it. You know the name, she said. I know the name, he said carefully. Then you know what he is. Victor Hayes was the CEO and principal owner of Atlas Defense Systems. He was also, depending on which circle you were in, either a visionary defense entrepreneur who had built one of the most innovative military contracting companies in American history, or the most dangerous man in any room he entered. He had connections at the Pentagon, connections on the Hill, connections in the intelligence community that went back 30 years to when he'd been a different kind of operator entirely. The kind whose name didn't appear in public records. I was also, Emma told Howell, in the next 20 minutes, the man who had ordered her father's death. She laid it out without drama, without performance. The way someone lays out information they have organized and reorganized so many times that it has stopped having emotional weight and become simply a sequence of facts. Her father had been embedded with a special forces unit running operations in the Sahel. In the course of those operations, he had come across evidence of a financial arrangement between a senior DoD official and a private defense contractor. An arrangement that involved classified technology being diverted from military contracts and sold through intermediary companies to foreign buyers. The contractor was Atlas Defense Systems. The senior DoD official had since been promoted twice. Daniel Carter had done what every soldier was trained to do. He had documented what he found, and he had secured the evidence. He had followed the reporting chain, which was where it went wrong because the reporting chain had been compromised in ways he didn't know. Within 72 hours of filing his report, he was dead. Within 2 weeks, the operation files had been reclassified. Within a month, the evidence he'd collected had been officially designated as unreliable intelligence and archived where nobody would ever look for it. And within a year, his daughter, who had spent that year asking questions that nobody wanted answered, had been erased. Howell asked. They shut down my program first, Emma said. I was part of a classified reconnaissance training initiative. Small unit, 8 people, They dissolved it, reassigned, everyone classified the records. Then they went after my identity. Someone filed falsified documentation, medical records, eventually a death certificate. A car accident. Very clean, very thorough. Who's they? Victor Hayes and at least 2 people inside the DoD who are on Atlas's payroll. I have names for one of them. The second one I've been trying to confirm for 18 months. And James Whitmore, she looked at him sharply. You know Whitmore. I know of him, Howell said. He filed a complaint 3 years ago about irregularities in the Carter operation report. It was dismissed. He told me it was dismissed, Emma said. He didn't tell me he'd filed it formally. She was quiet for a moment. That must have cost him something. It cost him his pension review, Howell said. Somebody flagged his file. She absorbed that. Where is Whitmore now? Howell asked. I don't know, she said. We had a communication protocol. I haven't been able to reach him since I arrived at Black Ridge. She paused. That worries me. It worried Howell too, though he didn't say so. What he said was, the 3 Atlas representatives on site, Chen, Walsh, and Pace. What do you know about them? Chen is communications. He's been coordinating with someone outside the facility since the exercise started. His call schedule is deliberate rotating times, never the same window twice. He's following an operational protocol. Walsh, technical. I think she's the one who knows where the equipment actually is, not where it's listed on the manifest, where it actually is. And Pace, Emma looked at him steadily. Pace is the one who set up the shooter on the ridge. The silence in the mobile command unit was very complete. That's a significant accusation, Howell said. He made a phone call from the East Vehicle lot on Tuesday night, Emma said. He was facing the ridge. 14 minutes later, I watched a specific pattern of rocks on that ridge shift slightly. Something moved into position up there. Something about the size of a person. She met Howell's eyes. Pace isn't a security coordinator. He moves like someone with a tactical background. The way he scans a room, the way he positions himself in spaces, the way he sat during every briefing with his back to a wall and a clear sight line to the exit. I know that profile because you were trained to recognize it. Because I was trained to have it, she said. Howell sat back. Outside, he heard someone say Aldrich's name. He heard the medical team's voices calm and efficient. He heard the helicopters. He thought about the shooter on the ridge who was now in DoD custody and would not be saying anything without lawyers who would take days to arrive, which meant whatever was still in motion had a window, and that window was closing but had not closed yet. The equipment in this staging area, he said. The Atlas research hardware. It's already been moved, Emma said. He stared at her. How do you know that? Because the attack was timed to the security rotation gap. 16 minutes. The gap opened at the exact moment the firefight started. The firefight lasted 11 minutes, which left 5 minutes at the end of the gap. Enough time to move a crate that size to a vehicle, one vehicle, probably already prepositioned on the service road on the north perimeter. Howell was already reaching for his radio. North perimeter, he said into it. I need units on the service road north side now, looking for a vehicle, possibly a cargo van or a utility truck. Do not approach, observe, and report. Static. Then a voice came back. Sir, north perimeter already has a vehicle. Security unit logged it 40 minutes ago as an authorized Atlas maintenance vehicle. Is it still there? A pause. Stand by. Another pause. Negative, sir, it's gone. Logged out at a pause as someone checked. Logged out 23 minutes ago, waved through by the gate security team. Howell looked at Emma. She looked back at him without surprise. Who was on gate security at that rotation, she asked. He asked the same question into the radio. The name that came back made him close his eyes for exactly 1 second. Pace. Robert Pace had personally authorized the vehicle to exit the facility 23 minutes ago. Emma said nothing. She waited. We need to move, Howell said. Yes, she said, we do. The vehicle has a 23-minute head start on a desert road. There are 2 main routes from this facility, and both connect to the same highway junction 12 miles north. 14 minutes at speed, she said immediately. If they left the moment they were waved through and didn't stop, they're at the junction now or just past it. Can you narrow the route? North Access Road is unpaved for the first 4 miles, she said. A cargo vehicle loaded with heavy equipment wouldn't take that route if it could avoid it. They would have taken the paved south connector that loops around the facility perimeter. Longer by 2 miles, but faster and less risk of damage to the equipment. That puts them on the highway. Which direction they go from the junction depends on where they're taking it, she said. What's the equipment specifically? What does it do? It's a prototype battlefield communications encryption system, compact, highly portable. Worth somewhere between 40 and 60 million to the right buyer. Foreign buyer, almost certainly. Then they're not going to a domestic location, she said. They need transport, air or land crossing. Given the time of day and the location and the fact that they had a 23-minute head start built into the plan, she stopped, thought for exactly 3 seconds. There's a private airstrip 41 miles east. It's listed as agricultural, but it has a runway long enough for a mid-size cargo aircraft. Howell was already on the radio. What happened in the next 8 minutes was not something Emma was part of, because Howell had her escorted back inside the mobile command unit by 2 agents who were professional and firm and very clearly not interested in negotiating. And she let herself be escorted because she was not stupid, and she understood that she had already done what she had come to do, or at least the first part of it, and the next part required people with badges and jurisdictions and things she currently didn't have. She sat inside the command unit and she listened to the radio traffic. She heard when units reached the highway junction. She heard when they picked up the vehicle on a traffic camera heading east. She heard when the airstrip was confirmed a cargo aircraft on the tarmac engines, running a ground crew that scattered the moment they saw the federal vehicles. She heard when the Atlas maintenance vehicle was boxed in 3 miles from the airstrip. She heard when they found the equipment in the back, intact, unharmed. $43 million of classified military technology in a black transport case that had Atlas Defense Systems stenciled on the side, in the particular irony of criminals who are arrogant enough to steal things in company-branded packaging. And she heard 20 minutes after that, the name that came across the radio when the agent at the airstrip read the tail number of the cargo aircraft and ran it through the registry. The aircraft was registered to a shell company. The shell company traced back through 3 layers of corporate structure to a holding group. The holding group was wholly owned by Victor Hayes. Emma sat very still when she heard that. She had known it would be Hayes. She had known it for 4 years. But knowing something and hearing it confirmed on a federal radio communication are different things. And for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the difference. She allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. Not triumph, not relief. Something more complicated than either. Something that felt like the specific, particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding something up for a very long time and has just been told it's safe to set it down. She thought about her father. She thought about a phone call she'd gotten at 2 in the morning 4 years ago when she'd been on base in Virginia, and a man from the Army Casualty Notification Office had told her in the careful, formal language they used for these things that Master Sergeant Daniel Carter had died in the line of duty. She thought about sitting on the floor of her barracks room afterward because her legs had stopped working the way legs are supposed to work, and thinking that it didn't make sense that her father was too careful to die in an equipment failure, that something was wrong. She had been right. She had been right for 4 years, and nobody had believed her, or more accurately, the people who might have believed her had been prevented from acting on it, and the people who didn't want the truth to come out had been very good at their jobs. Until today. Howell came back into the command unit 40 minutes after he'd left. He looked at her for a long moment before he said anything. "The vehicle and the equipment have been secured," he said. "I heard. The aircraft registration came back to a Hayes-connected entity." "I heard that too." He sat down across from her. He looked like a man rearranging things in his head, the way you rearrange a room when you find out the furniture has been in the wrong places the entire time. "How long have you been building this case?" he asked. 4 years, she said. "By yourself?" "Mostly. Whitmore helped when he could. There was one analyst at NSA who gave me a pointer 18 months ago before she went dark. I don't know what happened to her." Howell's expression tightened slightly. "Her name, she only gave me a first name, Diane." He wrote it down. He wrote everything down, she noticed. He was the kind of investigator who wrote things down even when he was recording, because the act of writing made him think differently, and he was smart enough to know that. "The 3 Atlas representatives," he said. "Walsh and Chen are being detained. Pace is in custody. He's not talking." "He won't talk voluntarily," Emma said. "He's ex-military, private contractor background. He knows what happens to people who talk and what happens to people who don't, and right now he still believes Hayes can protect him. Can he? Hayes has protected worse people for longer, she said. But Hayes doesn't know yet what you have. If he knew the aircraft was stopped, if he knew the chain came back to him, he'd cut Pace loose immediately. Pace is useful only as long as he's undetected. So we use the window before Hayes knows, Howell said. Pace wants something, Emma said. Everybody wants something. He's ex-military, which means somewhere underneath the contractor work. He still has something that functions like a conscience or at least a sense of self-preservation that's more sophisticated than simple loyalty. He did what he did for money. He'll do what comes next for protection. You want to talk to him? She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands still slightly marked from the work she'd done on Torres and Aldrich in the field. Then she looked up at Howell. I want to give you what you need to talk to him, she said carefully. I'm not law enforcement. I know what I am and what I'm not. But there's information he'll only give if he believes the person asking already has most of it. He needs to feel the walls closing. She paused. I know what information will close them. Howell studied her. Because you've spent 4 years collecting it. Because I spent 4 years collecting it, she said. And because my father spent the last weeks of his life collecting it before him. And because somewhere in what you pull off that aircraft and out of that vehicle and off whatever devices you take from Pace and Chen and Walsh tonight, there is the rest of what my father found. The documents he secured before they killed him. I know he secured them. He was not a man who found something and left it unsecured. He would have put it somewhere. I just never had the access to find where. Howell was quiet. The DoD archive, he said slowly. The evidence from the Carter operation that was reclassified as unreliable. It's not unreliable, she said. It was labeled that way to bury it. But the original files still exist. They have to. You can't actually destroy classified operational files. You can only reclassify them deep enough that nobody goes looking. If Hayes is running a classified technology theft operation, Howell said working it through and the financial irregularities your father found are connected to the same corporate structure as the shell companies on that aircraft. Then you have a chain, Emma said, from today's operation all the way back to Mali, 4 years ago, and Hayes is at every link. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when two people have just seen the same thing at the same time and are both absorbing the size of it. Howell picked up his phone, made a call, said 3 words to whoever answered, pull the Carter files. Then he hung up and looked at her. Ryan Mitchell and his team are going to want a conversation with you, he said. I know. They're not going to be easy about it. I don't need it to be easy, she said. They trusted you. They put a rifle in your hands. They're going to feel, I know how they're going to feel, Emma said quietly, and I'm going to sit with every single one of them as long as they need, because they have a right to that. She paused. But right now I need you to tell me one thing. What? James Whitmore, she said, I need to know where he is. Howell picked up his phone again. Asked someone to locate a James Whitmore retired military intelligence, age 71. He listened to the response and something in his face did something that Emma read immediately the way she had been trained to read faces. Her stomach dropped. Where is he? She said. Howell put the phone down slowly. He was admitted to Valley Medical Center in Las Vegas this morning, Howell said. Blunt force trauma. He was found on the street outside his hotel. She went very still. Is he alive? He's alive. He's in surgery. She breathed. Just breathed for 3 full seconds in and out because that was the only thing she could control in that particular moment. Hayes, she said, we don't know. It was Hayes, she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't waver. It just went flat in the way that voices go flat when emotion goes underground, when feeling gets converted into something more useful. He found out Whitmore was my contact. He tried to cut off my support before the exercise even started. She looked at Howell. That means Hayes knew when I was here. He knew who I was before today. Howell looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. If Hayes knew you were here, he said carefully, and he still ran the operation, then he thought I wouldn't matter, she said. He thought I was just a medic. She looked down at her hands again, then back up. He made the same mistake everyone else made. Outside, the Nevada desert was starting to cool into evening. The helicopters were gone. The wounded had been evacuated. The 32 operators of the SEAL team, were in various states of being debriefed, treated, and informed of things that were going to significantly change their understanding of the last 3 days. And in a hospital in Las Vegas, James Whitmore was in surgery. And in a federal holding facility that would be arranged within the hour, Robert Pace was sitting in a room thinking he still had options. He was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. Robert Pace had been in hard rooms before. I had sat across from people who wanted things from him. Information, confessions, names, numbers, and he had given them nothing. That was a skill, the same way marksmanship was a skill or close quarters tactics was a skill. You could train it, you could develop it until it became automatic. Pace had spent 15 years developing it, first in the Army, then in 3 different private security firms, and finally at Atlas Defense Systems, where the work paid better and the questions about what exactly you were doing and why were asked less frequently. He sat in the holding room at Black Ridge, and he was not afraid. That was what he told himself. The room was a converted administrative office. Metal table, 2 chairs, a camera in the upper right corner that he'd clocked the moment they brought him in. 1 agent outside the door. He'd counted the footsteps. 1 set. They weren't worried about him running, which meant they either had more on him than he thought, or they were underestimating him. And in his experience, federal agents almost never underestimated a detained subject on the day of an active operation. So they had more on him than he thought. He ran through the sequence in his head. The shooter on the ridge was in custody, but the shooter didn't know Pace by name and couldn't connect him directly to anything except a phone call that could be explained. The vehicle had left the facility under his authorization, but vehicle authorizations were documented, and he'd been careful about how he documented it. Chen and Walsh were detained, but Chen wouldn't talk because Chen understood exactly what talking meant, and Walsh didn't know enough to be dangerous. The equipment was another matter. If they'd stopped the vehicle before it reached the airstrip, that was a problem. If they'd gotten to the aircraft, that was a bigger problem. If they'd run the registration, he stopped that thought. Unneeded information he didn't have, and sitting here running scenarios without information was not useful. What was useful was staying quiet, staying calm, and waiting for the attorney that Atlas would send. Hayes had protocols for this. Pace had been assured of that multiple times. There were protocols. There was a response structure. All he had to do was wait. The door opened at 7:14 p.m. I expected Howell. Howell had introduced himself when they brought Pace in professional, correct, the kind of federal agent who did everything by the book, because doing things by the book protected you as much as it constrained you. It wasn't Howell who walked through the door. It was Emma Carter. Pace went very still. She sat down across from him without asking permission and without saying anything for a long moment. She just looked at him the way she'd looked at the ridgeline that afternoon, with a quality of focused attention that felt less like observation and more like calculation. Like she was running numbers. Like he was a problem she'd already mostly solved and was just checking her work. "You know who I am," she said. He said nothing. "Victor Hayes told you my name before the exercise started," she said. "He told you I'd be here. He told you I was a problem." Pace kept his face neutral. "He told you I was dead," she said, "officially, and he told you that if I showed up anyway, I should be handled." She paused. "That's why the shooter had a secondary target. Not just the SEAL operators, me." Something moved in Pace's face. Very small, very fast. She saw it. "The shooter's primary mission was suppression," she said. "Pin down the team, create chaos, cover the equipment transfer. But he had a secondary target on his list. A civilian medic who shouldn't have been able to stop him." Another pause. "Except I did." Pace said, "I want my attorney." "Your attorney is being arranged," Emma said. "Hayes has a firm on retainer that handles exactly this kind of situation. They're very good, expensive, the kind of lawyers who can take a clear case and make it complicated enough that things get delayed for months." She folded her hands on the table. "You have maybe 3 hours before they arrive." He looked at her. "Then I'll wait 3 hours." "You could," she said, "or you could listen to what I know and then decide whether waiting 3 hours is actually in your interest." He said nothing, but he didn't look away. She took that as permission enough. "Atlas Defense has been running a classified technology diversion operation for at least 6 years," she said. "Prototype equipment from DoD contracts gets officially logged as damaged or destroyed during testing. In reality, it gets redirected to a separate logistics chain and sold to foreign buyers through a network of shell companies. The money comes back through 3 different offshore structures before it lands anywhere clean. She watched his face. You've been part of that logistics chain for 2 years, but you're not part of the financial structure. You're operational, which means you know the what and the how, but you don't know all the who. Pace's jaw shifted slightly. The aircraft registration came back to a Hayes entity 40 minutes ago, she said. That's federal jurisdiction, that's conspiracy, that's technology, export violations, and that's just from today. She leaned forward slightly. Here's what you don't know. There are files in a duty archive that connect Atlas Defense to an operation in Mali 4 years ago. Those files were reclassified as unreliable intelligence. They're being pulled right now. When investigators get into those files, and they will tonight, because the chain of jurisdiction opened up the moment that aircraft registration came back, they're going to find something. She stopped. He couldn't help it. What are they going to find? She looked at him steadily. They're going to find my father's name, and Hayes's name, and the name of at least one DoD official who's been on Atlas's payroll for 6 years. She paused. And they're going to find one other name, someone at the operational level who coordinated the logistics of what happened in Mali. Someone who wasn't at Atlas then, but was connected to them through a security contractor who no longer exists. The blood moved differently in Pace's face. She saw it. You weren't there, she said. I want to be clear, I'm not saying you were in Mali, but the contractor you worked for before Atlas was called Meridian Group. And Meridian Group had a contract with Atlas Defense in the year my father died. And someone from that contractor coordinated logistics for the operation that killed him. Pace said, I didn't, and then stopped. Emma waited. He said nothing more, but he had said 2 words. 2 words that were not a denial and not an assertion and not a request for his attorney. She said, I'm not here to charge you with my father's death. I don't have that authority. But the people who do have that authority are going to be in this room within the next hour. And what they find in those archives is going to determine whether your name is on a short list or a long one. You're not law enforcement, he said. No, she agreed. Then you can't offer me anything. No, she agreed again. But I can tell you what Howell is about to offer you because I was in the room when he decided to offer it, and you should know the shape of it before he walks in here and makes it formal. She looked at him without blinking. Full cooperation. Everything you know about the diversion operation. Names, dates, logistics, financials, contact protocols. In exchange for a reduced charge structure and protective placement. Pace was quiet. Hayes will cut you loose, she said. The moment he knows the aircraft registration came back to him, he is already in a room somewhere with attorneys constructing a version of events in which Robert Pace is a rogue contractor who acted without authorization. He has done this before with other people in your position. I can give you the names of 2 of them if you want. One is in federal prison. The other one, she stopped. Let the pause do its work. The other one is not in prison. The implication sat between them like something physical. Pace looked at his hands. First time he'd looked away from her since she sat down. That meant something. She knew what it meant. The attorney Hayes sends, she said more quietly now, works for Hayes, not for you. Attorneys on retainer have a primary obligation to the entity that retains them. If Hayes' best legal strategy requires your conviction to narrow the exposure on his end, that attorney will facilitate it. She paused. You know that. You've always known that. You just haven't had to think about it until right now. Pace looked back up. Molly, he said. One word, very flat. Yes, she said. If there's something in those files that connects back to Meridian, there is, she said. I'm not going to tell. I'm not certain when I am. Another long silence. Outside the door, something moved. Footsteps. More than one person this time. Pace heard it too. He tracked the sound automatically the way trained people track sounds automatically. That's Howell, Emma said. He's going to give you about 4 minutes before he comes in. Pace looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. It was complicated. It had layers. It was the expression of a man who went into a particular line of work for a particular set of reasons and has just spent several minutes being forced to look at what those reasons have actually cost him. Your father, Pace said. She waited. He didn't die from equipment failure, Pace said. She kept her voice completely level. I know. The report was written by someone on Hayes's payroll, she said. I know that too. Pace nodded once. Slow. Then he said, get Howell. She stood up, walked to the door, knocked twice, then she stepped aside and let the investigators do their work because she understood the difference between what she could do and what had to be done by people with the authority to make it matter. Outside the holding room in the hallway that smelled like concrete and recycled air, she leaned against the wall and pressed both hands flat against the cold surface and breathed. Just breathed, in and out, the way her father had taught her to breathe on ranges in Virginia, the way you steady yourself before a shot that matters. She had just done something that was going to take weeks to fully understand. She had walked into a room with a man who had, in some capacity, she still didn't have the complete picture of been connected to the circumstances that killed her father. She had sat across from him, and she had been calm. She had been precise. She had been exactly what her father had trained her to be. And she had not asked him the question she actually wanted to ask him. She had not said, did he suffer? Did he know what was happening? Did he die thinking he'd failed? She had not asked those things because this was not the moment for them, and she knew it, and knowing it didn't make it easier. The time was 7:31 p.m. Howell found her in the hallway 17 minutes later. He looked like a man who had been given something very large and was still calibrating exactly how to hold it. He's talking, Howell said. She pushed off the wall. All of it. Enough. He's structuring it through the formal cooperation agreement, but he's giving us the operation. Names, contacts, the logistics chain for at least 4 transfers over the past 2 years. Howell paused. And Molly. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. He wasn't there, Howell said. He was right about that. But he knew the person who coordinated it from the meridian end. He has a name. Do you have it? We have it. Is it Hayes directly? Hayes doesn't get his hands dirty directly, Howell said. It's a layer below him, but the financial trail from Meridian's Molly contract connects directly to an Atlas subsidiary, and that subsidiary is wholly owned by Hayes. The legal chain is going to take time to build formally, but it's there. She nodded, kept nodding for a moment longer than necessary because her body needed to do something. Whitmore, she said. Still in surgery, Howell said. Last update was 30 minutes ago. He's stable. When can I see him? Not tonight, maybe tomorrow if he comes out of it well. Howell studied her. Go sit down somewhere. You've been running on. I'm fine. You have been in a firefight, performed emergency trauma care on 2 men, made a 430-meter shot, and spent the last 3 hours in an interrogation room extracting cooperation from a hostile subject. Howell said, you are not fine. You are operational. Those are different things, and your body knows the difference even when your brain doesn't. She looked at him. You remind me of my father, she said. I didn't seem to know how to take that. He settled on, sit down, I'll find you something to eat and I'll update you the moment anything changes. She sat down. At 9:47 p.m., Howell's phone rang. She watched his face as he listened. She had learned to read information from faces before the person had decided to deliver it, and what she read in Howell's face over the next 40 seconds moved through several distinct registers. Surprise, gravity, something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it, the particular alertness of someone who has just understood that the situation is larger than they thought. He hung up. The Carter archive files, he said, they've been pulled. And someone got there first. She stood up. What do you mean someone got there first? The reclassification, Howell said. The files were reclassified about 3 years ago, moved to a secured archive in a DoD facility in Virginia. Access requires dual authorization at the GS-15 level or above. When the request went in tonight to pull them, he stopped. The files have been accessed once in the last 3 years, 6 weeks ago, under authorization codes belonging to a senior DoD analyst. Hoopam, Howell said a name. Emma stared at him. The name he said was the second name, the one she'd spent 18 months trying to confirm. The one she hadn't told Howell because she hadn't been certain. She had been close to certain. She had been 90% certain. But 90% is not the same as confirmed. And she was not someone who dealt in unconfirmed information if she could help it. Confirmed now. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Lawrence Mercer, Howell said. He accessed those files 6 weeks ago, which means He knew we were getting close, she said. 6 weeks ago, something spooked him. He went into the archive to check what was there, to assess exposure, and possibly to modify it. She felt something cold move through her. Can you tell if the files were altered? The forensics team is on it now. If anything was changed in the last 6 weeks, they'll find it. Digital records leave traces even when people think they've been careful. Howell paused. But here's the problem. Mercer has been notified that the files are being pulled as part of an active investigation. Standard procedure for anyone whose authorization codes appear in an access log. He's being warned. Technically, he's being notified, but the practical effect is the same, she said. How long does he have before anyone can actually move on him? Realistically, the legal structure to move against a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense on the basis of what we currently have is going to take days, she said. At minimum. At minimum, Howell confirmed. She turned away from him and took 3 steps toward the wall and then stopped because there was nowhere to go. She stood with her back to him for a moment, thinking, running it through the way her father had taught her to run a tactical problem from every angle, accounting for every variable, not stopping until you'd found the angle everyone else had missed. Hayes doesn't know the extent of what Pace gave us, she said without turning around. Not yet, but he knows the aircraft was stopped. He'll know within the hour if he doesn't already. So Hayes knows his operation today is blown. He knows Pace is in custody. He doesn't know yet exactly what Pace said. She turned back around. If Hayes knows Mercer accessed those files and Hayes knows the investigation is active, then Hayes is going to contact Mercer tonight. Howell said nothing for a moment. Then, to coordinate their response, or to make sure Mercer doesn't become a liability, she said. Hayes did not get where he is by being sentimental about liabilities. The way Howell looked at her, then told her he had had the same thought and had been hoping she wouldn't arrive at it yet. We need Mercer's communications monitored, she said. That requires a warrant. Then get one. You have enough from Pace's cooperation and the aircraft registration to support a warrant on a conspiracy charge. Tonight, right now, she said, because if Hayes reaches Mercer before you do, and Mercer decides to run, she stopped. He has clearances. He has access to systems that would let him move money, modify records, flag certain files for secure deletion. And everything Hayes needs to cover the Molly connection. Howell was already on his phone. She watched him make 3 calls in quick succession. She could hear from his end of the conversations that the first call found resistance, the second call found less resistance, and the third call to someone whose name he didn't say out loud but whose authority was clearly above everything that had been involved so far, found none. He hung up after the third call. Communications monitoring is being authorized, he said. It will be active within 20 minutes. He paused. You were right about the warrant. We have enough. She nodded. At 11:03 p.m., the monitoring picked up the first communication. It wasn't a phone call. It was an email drafted on a personal device sent to an address that came back to a law firm in Geneva that specialized in the kind of international financial arrangements that required a particular type of lawyer with a particular comfort level, sentences long. Howell read it to her from the printed intercept, his voice careful and flat, in the way that voices go flat when the words being spoken are going to matter in a courtroom someday, and you want to be precise about them. The email referenced a contingency plan. It referenced movement of funds. It referenced in language that was clearly designed to be deniable the permanent resolution of outstanding documentation concerns. Emma listened to all 6 sentences. Then she said, outstanding documentation concerns. He's talking about the Molly files. That's how the forensics team is reading it. He's going to try to destroy whatever physical evidence still exists outside the digital archive. She looked at Howell. There's a physical component. I've known for 2 years that my father secured physical documentation, not digital, something he could hold, something that couldn't be wiped remotely. She paused. He would have left it somewhere safe, somewhere connected to someone he trusted completely. Howell looked at her. She looked back at him. Whitmore, she said. They both understood it at the same moment. Her father had trusted James Whitmore the way you trust the person who has been in the field with you, who has seen the worst of what you've seen, who knows what it costs to do the work and doesn't pretend it costs nothing. He had trusted Whitmore enough to tell him what he'd found, enough to file a formal complaint which had cost Whitmore his pension review and put a flag on his file. Enough perhaps to give Whitmore something to hold. Whitmore is in surgery, Howell said. I know. We can't reach him tonight. I know that too. If Hayes knows Whitmore was your contact, and based on what happened to him this morning, Hayes knows then Hayes may believe Whitmore has something, which means once Mercer moves to protect the documentation, Whitmore becomes a target again, she said. He's in a hospital in Las Vegas. He's unconscious. He can't protect himself. Howell was already on the phone again. This call was short and very direct. When he hung up, he said, there will be federal protective detail at the hospital within 40 minutes. She breathed. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Then he said, there's something else you should know. Something in his tone made her go still. The digital forensics team finished their preliminary analysis of the archive files, Howell said. The files Mercer accessed 6 weeks ago. They found evidence of modification. Several entries were altered. Timestamps were changed. 2 witness statements in the original operational record were removed. She waited. But the alterations were made to copies that were kept in a secondary archive system that Mercer apparently didn't know existed. The originals are intact. Howell paused. And in the original witness statements that were supposed to have been classified and buried 3 years ago, there is a direct account of what happened to your father. She heard her own heartbeat. A direct account, she said. From who? A Special Forces medic who was with your father's unit in Mali, Sergeant First Class David Reyes. He filed a formal witness statement 48 hours after your father's death. The statement was classified almost immediately. Reyes was subsequently reassigned to a post in Japan and separated from service 6 months later under administrative grounds. Howell held her eyes. In his statement, Reyes describes witnessing a conversation between your father and a man he identified as an Atlas Defense Systems representative. He describes your father showing this representative a document. He describes the representative making a phone call immediately after. He describes your father's manner in the hours before his death, calm but alert, like a man who knew something was coming. Emma said nothing for a long moment. My father knew, she said finally. It looks like he knew something was wrong, Howell said quietly. Whether he knew exactly what he knew, she said, he would have known. He was too good not to know. She stopped, started again. He went anyway. Yes, because the evidence was worth more than... She stopped again. She pressed her hand flat on the table in front of her, pressed it hard. He went anyway because he was my father, and he believed that truth was worth something, and he couldn't have lived with himself if he'd walked away from it. The room was quiet. Howell let it be quiet for a moment, which was the right thing to do, and she registered that it was the right thing even while she was inside the feeling of it, the enormous, complex, grief-saturated feeling of learning that the thing you suspected about someone you loved was true and that the truth was both worse and better than you'd known. Worse because he'd known the risk. Better because he had not been careless. He had not been caught off guard. He had done what he did on purpose with full knowledge because he believed it was right. He had always believed the right thing was worth doing even when it cost everything. She had always believed the same thing. She understood now in a way she hadn't before that this was not a coincidence. At 12:19 a.m., a federal agent in Las Vegas confirmed that a second individual had arrived at Valley Medical Center and attempted to access James Whitmore's room. The individual presented false federal identification and was intercepted by the protective detail before reaching the floor. The individual was in custody. The false identification when run traced back to a security firm contracted by Atlas Defense Systems. Howell showed her the report. She read it twice. They moved fast, she said. They moved the moment Mercer got the warning, Howell said, which means the chain of command between Hayes and Mercer is faster than we estimated. Or Mercer didn't wait for Hayes, she said. If Mercer is protecting himself as much as he's protecting Hayes, he would have moved on Whitmore independently, to eliminate the risk before Hayes even knew the problem existed. A Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense independently ordering a hit on a retired military intelligence officer who has spent 3 years trying to expose a conspiracy that connects back to him, she said. Yes, I think exactly that. Howell sat with that for a moment. The individual in custody at the hospital, he said. He's going to talk faster than Pace did. He's a contractor, not a true believer. He doesn't have the same threshold. When he talks, Emma said, you'll have the direct link between Mercer and an attempt on Whitmore's life tonight. while an active federal investigation is running. That's not a position anyone can lawyer their way out of, Howell said. No, she said, it's not. She stood up from the table. She walked to the window of the office they'd been using, and she looked out at the dark Nevada desert, and she thought about her father standing on a range in Virginia, teaching a 17-year-old girl how to breathe before a shot. Halfway out, stop, wait, let the moment come to you. She had waited 4 years for this moment. She had not gone to it. She had let it come. I need to know something, she said without turning from the window. Howell waited. Sergeant Reyes, she said, the medic who filed the witness statement. Where is he now? She heard Howell pick up his phone, heard him ask the question, heard the response come back after a short pause. When Howell spoke again, his voice was careful. He's in Portland, Howell said. He runs a veterans medical clinic. Has for the last 2 years. He's been there the whole time. She nodded slowly. He never stopped, she said, filing that statement, getting separated from service, losing everything professionally. He never stopped being the kind of person who files a witness statement when he sees something wrong. No, Howell agreed, he didn't. She thought about all the people who hadn't stopped. Whitmore, who filed a formal complaint and lost his pension review and kept going. Reyes, who lost his career and kept going. The NSA analyst named Diane, who had pointed her in a direction 18 months ago and then gone dark, and who Emma had never stopped worrying about. All of them moving in the same direction. All of them doing what her father had done. And tonight, finally at 12:41 a.m., in a converted administrative office at Black Ridge Training Facility, the walls were closing on Victor Hayes from more directions than he could cover. He didn't know it yet, but he would. Victor Hayes woke up at 5:47 a.m. Not because an alarm went off, not because someone called him. He woke up the way he always woke up, suddenly, completely, without the transitional fog that most people move through between sleep and consciousness. It was a skill he'd developed 40 years ago in environments where waking up slowly could get you killed, and it had never left him. Even now, even in a bedroom that cost more than most people earned in 5 years, even surrounded by the particular silence of serious wealth. He lay still for exactly 12 seconds. Then he reached for his phone. There were 4 missed calls from his chief of operations, 3 from his legal team, 1 from a number he didn't recognize but whose area code he did Las Vegas. He sat up. He called his chief of operations first. The call lasted 90 seconds. When it ended, Victor Hayes stood up from his bed, walked to the window of his Washington, D.C. penthouse, and looked out at a city that was just beginning to go gray with early morning light. And he understood that the operation at Black Ridge had not just failed. It had failed in the specific catastrophic way that left pieces everywhere. Pieces that pointed in directions, pieces that connected to other pieces, pieces that a competent investigator could spend the next 6 months assembling into something that would end him. He called his lead attorney next. Tell me what we have, he said. The attorney, a man named Gordon Fitch, who had been managing Hayes's legal exposure for 11 years and had developed a particular talent for speaking in complete sentences that contained no information that could be used against his client in court, said, the situation is developing. We have limited visibility into what's been disclosed. I would advise no communications outside this channel until we understand the scope. Pace, Hayes said, a pause. We've been unable to make contact. Meaning he's already cooperating. Another pause. I would not characterize, Gordon, Hayes said, is Pace talking or not? A longer pause. The indication suggests there has been some form of engagement with investigators. The extent is unknown, Hayes said. Right. He hung up. He stood at the window and ran the problem the same way he had run problems for 4 decades. Not with panic, not with emotion, with a specific cold clarity that had built Atlas Defense Systems from a mid-tier contractor into a $300 million enterprise that had its fingers in more classified programs than most members of Congress knew existed. Pace talking was a problem, a manageable problem, because Pace knew the operational side and not the financial architecture. And the financial architecture was where the true exposure lived. But it was a problem. The aircraft registration was a bigger problem. He'd been told about that at 11 p.m. the previous night, and he'd spent an hour on the phone with Gordon Fitch constructing a narrative in which the shell company's connection to Hayes was explainable as a routine investment structure with no operational involvement on his part. It was a credible narrative. It would take time to dismantle in court. But then there was Mercer. Lawrence Mercer was the problem that kept Hayes awake in the 12 seconds between waking and reaching for his phone. Mercer was smart and cautious and had been careful for 6 years. But Mercer had one vulnerability that Hayes had always known about and always managed. When Mercer felt cornered, he acted fast, and he acted without consulting anyone. And fast, independent action was the kind of thing that left evidence. Hayes's phone rang at 6:03 a.m. He looked at the screen. It was Mercer. He almost didn't answer. Then he answered. "They have someone at the hospital," Mercer said immediately. His voice was tight in a way that Hayes had never heard before. "The contractor I sent, he was picked up. Federal protective detail was already there." Hayes said nothing. "Victor," Mercer's voice cracked slightly on the name. "They were already there. That means they knew. That means either Pace told them about Whitmore or the woman told them," Hayes said quietly. Silence. "She's alive," Mercer said. I had confirmation from Pace that the secondary target made a 400-meter shot and neutralized our man on the ridge," Hayes said. "So no, Lawrence, the secondary target is not resolved." The silence on Mercer's end was the silence of a man recalibrating everything he thought he knew about a situation. "She knows about me," Mercer said. "She's known about you for 18 months, Hayes said. "She just couldn't confirm it. She may be able to confirm it now." "Then You need to stop," Hayes said. "You need to stop making independent decisions and stop making calls and stop moving contractors around and sit still while Gordon's team constructs our response. Every action you take right now creates a trail." "There's already a trail," Mercer said, and his voice had gone from tight to something else, something closer to the edge. "Victor, if they pull the original witness statements from the Carter archive, the unmodified versions, we'll address that. How I accessed those files 6 weeks ago. There's going to be a log. They're going to see my authorization codes in the access record." "Lawrence," Hayes said very quietly, "I need you to hear me. Stop talking. Stop acting. Stop moving. Sit in your office and let Gordon handle this. Do you understand?" A long pause. "Do you understand?" Hayes repeated. "Yes," Mercer said. Hayes hung up. He stood at the window for another 30 seconds. Then he called Gordon Fitch back. "Mercer is a problem," he said. "I assumed," Fitch said. "He sent a contractor to the hospital last night independently. The contractor was picked up." A pause that contained the particular quality of a lawyer, understanding that the situation has just become significantly more expensive. "That creates direct exposure on Mercer, yes," Hayes said. "Whether it creates exposure on us depends on what the contractor knows and what he says." "What does the contractor know?" "He knows he was hired to manage a situation at a hospital in Las Vegas. He doesn't know by whom precisely because Mercer uses cutouts. But the cutouts can be traced if someone is motivated to trace them." Hayes paused. "Someone is motivated to trace them. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Lawrence Mercer has become a liability that is operating outside of our control," Hayes said. "And I'm suggesting that you begin preparing a narrative in which his actions over the past 6 years were taken without my knowledge or authorization." The silence on Fitch's end this time was different from the previous ones. It was the silence of a man who has been doing a particular kind of work for a long time and has just been asked to do something at the edge of even that work's boundaries. "That narrative," Fitch said carefully, "requires that we have documentation supporting your lack of knowledge." "Then create documentation supporting my lack of knowledge," Hayes said. Another silence. Gordon to Hayes said, "I have paid your firm $4.7 million over the past 11 years. I need you to tell me that number is worth something." "I'll make calls," Fitch said, and hung up. Hayes put his phone down on the window ledge. He thought about Emma Carter. He had known about her for 2 years. He'd had her identity erased as a precaution, not because she was an immediate threat, but because she was the kind of person who eventually becomes one. She was too smart and too patient and too motivated by exactly the kind of personal grievance that didn't fade with time. He'd underestimated how much of her father was in her. He'd looked at the file, a civilian medic, 5'3", living under an assumed name in Montana, and he'd made a calculation that in retrospect had been based on incomplete information. He hadn't known what she could do. He hadn't known what she'd been trained to do because those records had been classified along with everything else about the program she'd been part of. He knew her father's record because Daniel Carter was documented. He hadn't bothered to look more carefully at what Daniel Carter had passed on to his daughter. That was his mistake. He acknowledged it the way he acknowledged all mistakes, briefly, clearly, and then moved on. At 7:22 a.m. his phone rang again. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Different area code this time. He answered. Mr. Hayes, said a voice he didn't recognize. My name is Garrett Howell. I'm a special agent with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. I'm calling to inform you that we have a federal arrest warrant for your detention, pending investigation into conspiracy to commit technology, theft, conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and obstruction of justice charges connected to the death of Master Sergeant Daniel Carter in Mali 4 years ago. A brief pause. We also have a warrant for the arrest of Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Lawrence Mercer, which is being executed at this moment. Hayes said nothing. Mr. Hayes, Howell said. Are you there? I'm here, Hayes said. I'll need to contact my attorney. That's your right, Howell said. There are agents at your building now. They'll wait for you in the lobby. You have 30 minutes to come down voluntarily before we come up. The call ended. Hayes stood at the window. 28 floors below in the lobby of his building, he could see 2 dark sedans that hadn't been there when he'd first looked out. He could see figures moving near the entrance. Professional figures. People who knew how to wait. He picked up the phone, called Fitch. Fitch didn't answer. He called again. On the third call, Fitch answered with a voice that sounded like a man who had already heard the news and was measuring every word against its future implications. They have a warrant, Hayes said. I know, Fitch said. They called me as well. Victor, at this stage, I have to advise you. Don't, Hayes said. Victor, don't say what you're about to say. A pause, then Fitch said it anyway. At this stage, I have to advise you that my firm's representation of Atlas Defense Systems as a corporate entity creates a conflict of interest with your representation as an individual defendant. I'll refer you to a colleague who handles. Hayes hung up. He stood very still. Gordon Fitch, who had been paid $4.7 million over 11 years, had just done exactly what Hayes had done to other people in exactly this situation. He had made himself unavailable. Hayes put his phone in his pocket. He walked to the closet, dressed in the way he always dressed, carefully correctly in clothing that communicated authority and competence, because clothing communicated things whether you intended it to or not, and Hayes had never in his adult life been unintentional about the things he communicated. He rode the elevator down 28 floors. The doors opened on the lobby. The agents were waiting. And Victor Hayes, who had signed an order on a Tuesday morning and erased 2 lives without flinching, walked toward them with his hands visible and his face composed. And he thought about a woman 5 feet 3 inches tall in a Nevada desert, and he understood completely. Finally, without any capacity for self-deception, remaining that he had made a mistake the size of his entire empire. He just didn't know yet exactly how complete the evidence against him was. He was about to find out. At 8:14 a.m., Emma's phone rang. She had been awake since before dawn. She had not really slept. She had spent the pre-dawn hours in a chair in the corner of the Black Ridge Administrative Building, not quite sleeping and not quite awake, in the particular suspended state that her body defaulted to in high-stress environments, conserving energy, processing information, staying ready for the next thing even when the next thing was unclear. She looked at the screen. Howell. Hayes is in custody, Howell said when she answered. Mercer was taken at 7:20 a.m. And something else. She waited. The contractor who was picked up at the hospital last night, Howell said. He talked, fast and completely. He gave us the cutout structure between Mercer and the operation. Names, payment records, communication logs, all of it. And in the communication logs, he paused. There's a record of a direct call between Mercer and a number that traces back to a device registered to a security firm. The firm is the same one that handled the identity erasure 2 years ago, your death certificate. She processed that. Mercer signed off on erasing me, she said. Mercer signed off on it, Howell confirmed. Hayes authorized the funding. We have both ends of it now. She looked at the wall across from her. She looked at it for several seconds. Then she said, Whitmore. Out of surgery, Howell said. 3 hours ago. He's stable. He's conscious as of 40 minutes ago. He's been asking for you. She stood up. I'll be in Las Vegas in 2 hours, she said. There's a transport arranged, Howell said. It leaves from the facility airfield in 40 minutes. She was already moving. On the transport, she sat by herself and looked out the window at the desert moving below her, and she thought about things she hadn't let herself think about in 4 years. Small things. Things from before. Her father's voice on Sunday morning phone calls, always early, always direct, always ending with the same words. You doing okay? Because that was how he asked if she was okay. Not are you happy, not are you safe, just are you okay, as if okay was the baseline worth protecting and everything beyond it was a bonus. She had not been okay for 4 years. She was not sure what okay was going to feel like when she got there. But she thought she might be about to start finding out. James Whitmore looked smaller in a hospital bed than he did anywhere else. That was the first thing she noticed when she walked into the room at 10:31 a.m. He was 71 years old and he had the build of a man who had been strong and hadn't entirely stopped being strong, but lying in a hospital bed with monitors attached and an IV in his arm, he looked like a man who had used up a significant portion of whatever he had. His eyes were open. They tracked to her the moment she came through the door, and something in his face shifted, not surprise because Whitmore was not a man who expressed surprise, but something warmer and more complicated than his face usually allowed. You're alive, he said. His voice was rough from the anesthesia. So are you, she said. Barely. Barely counts, he said. She pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. Hayes is in custody, she said. He closed his eyes just for a second, then opened them again. Mercer custody as of this morning. He breathed out slowly. The monitors tracked his heart rate. She watched it for a moment, steady, a little elevated, but steady. The archive files, he said, pulled and confirmed. The original witness statements are intact, Reyes's statement. Reyes, Whitmore said. Something crossed his face. He was 23 years old when he filed that statement. He knew exactly what it was going to cost him. I know, Emma said. Your father trusted him, Whitmore said. He trusted him specifically because he was young and hadn't had time to learn that telling the truth about certain things was professionally fatal. Your father thought that was an asset. He was right, she said. Whitmore looked at her. You went into the holding room with Pace. Howell told you. Howell tells me things. It's a habit he developed when I was still in a position to give him information he needed. He hasn't broken it. He paused. You shouldn't have been in that room. I know. Howell should not have let you into that room. I know that too. But Pace talked, Whitmore said. Pace talked, she confirmed. I was quiet for a moment. The monitors hummed softly. Outside the room, she could hear the normal sounds of a hospital. Footsteps, a cart being wheeled. Someone's voice down the corridor. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the sounds of a place where the primary activity was keeping people alive. James, she said. He looked at her. My father, she said. In the last weeks, before Molly, did he know what was happening? Whitmore was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he might be deciding not to answer. Then he said, he called me 3 days before he died. She kept her breathing steady. He said he had documentation, Whitmore said. He said he'd found something he'd been looking for, and that it was bigger than he'd expected, and that he needed me to understand something. He paused. He said, if this goes wrong, tell Emma I finished it. Don't let her think I stopped. The monitors hummed. Her hands in her lap were very still. He knew it might go wrong, she said. He knew, Whitmore said, and he went anyway, because that was who he was. He sent me a letter, she said quietly. 3 days before he died, I got it the week after the notification. I thought it was a coincidence, the timing. I didn't understand it for months. What did it say? She had memorized the letter. She had read it so many times that the actual physical paper had started to deteriorate, and she'd scanned it and kept copies in 3 different places because she could not allow it to disappear. She could recite it word for word, but she didn't recite it now. She gave Whitmore the part that mattered. He said the truth doesn't always arrive wearing a uniform. Sometimes you have to carry it in something less obvious. He said, I taught you how to wait. I taught you how to breathe. I should have taught you that those 2 things together are the most powerful combination in any field, any context, any kind of fight. She paused. Then he said, I love you, and I'm proud of you, not for anything you've done yet, for who you already are. Whitmore looked at the ceiling. She saw his jaw tighten and then release. He knew you were going to have to carry this, Whitmore said. He was telling you he trusted you to carry it. Yes, she said. Did you know that when you read it? No, she said. I thought it was just a letter. Fathers write letters. I thought. She stopped. I understood it later, when I understood what happened. And then it was both things. Just a letter from my father, and also exactly what you said. Whitmore looked at her. He'd be proud, Whitmore said, not of today specifically, of how you carried it, 4 years alone without losing yourself. She looked at her hands. I lost myself a few times, she said, and found yourself back, he said. That counts. She stayed at the hospital for 3 hours. During that time, Howell called twice with updates. At 11:40 a.m., Gordon Fitch's firm announced publicly that they were withdrawing from representation of Atlas Defense Systems, citing a conflict of interest. The kind of legal move that told everyone watching exactly how the wind was blowing without saying a word that could be used in court. At 12:15 p.m., 2 additional Atlas Defense employees in the company's Washington office were taken in for questioning in connection with the financial diversion operation. At 1:03 p.m., a federal judge in Virginia signed an expanded warrant covering Atlas Defense Systems records going back 8 years. 8 years. That meant the investigation was going back further than Molly. That meant someone had reason to believe Molly was not the beginning. Howell confirmed it on his second call. We're finding transactions that predate the Carter operation by 2 years, he said. Same structure, different technology, earlier buyers. He paused. Victor Hayes has been running this for a long time. My father wasn't the first, Emma said. We don't know that yet, but it's possible. She absorbed that. The idea that there might be others, other families, other soldiers, other people sitting somewhere, carrying something for years without knowing the full size of what they were carrying was something she was going to need to sit with for a while. She went back to Whitmore's room. He was sleeping. She sat in the chair beside the bed and she watched him breathe. And she thought about her father, and she thought about Sergeant David Reyes in Portland running a veterans clinic, and she thought about an NSA analyst named Diane who had gone dark, and she thought about 32 SEAL operators who were somewhere right now being debriefed and trying to understand what had actually happened in the Nevada desert yesterday. At 2:17 p.m., her phone showed a text from a number she didn't have saved. She read it. It said, "This is Ryan Mitchell. Howell gave me your number. I'd like to talk when you're ready. No rush, but I'd like to talk." She looked at the text for a moment. Then she typed, "Give me a day. I'll reach out." She put the phone away. Whitmore stirred. "Who was that?" he asked without opening his eyes. "Mitchell," she said, SEAL team leader. "What did he want to talk?" "About what you did. About what happened," she said. "What I did is part of that." Whitmore opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. "What are you going to tell him?" She thought about that. "The truth," she said. "All of it. Starting from the beginning. He deserves that. All of them do." Whitmore nodded slowly. "Your father used to say that the only thing harder than telling the truth was figuring out how to tell it in a way that serves something larger than yourself." "I know," she said. "He said that to me approximately 40 times. Did it sink in?" She looked at her hands again. "Turn them over." The marks from the field work yesterday were still there. "I think it finally did," she said. At 3:45 p.m., Howell called a third time. She stepped into the hallway. "Something came in," he said, "from the Portland clinic." She went very still. "Reyes," she said. "He heard about the investigation. He's been watching the news. He called the DCIS field office in Portland an hour ago." Howell paused. "He has something. Physical documentation." Her heart rate changed. "What kind of documentation?" "He won't say on the phone, but he says your father gave it to him directly, 3 days before Molly. He said your father told him to keep it until it was safe to give it to the right person." Another pause. "He says he's been waiting 4 years to give it to the right person." She closed her eyes. 3 days before Molly. The same 3 days. The letter. The call to Whitmore, and something given to a 23-year-old medic who was young enough to still believe that telling the truth was worth what it cost. Her father had not left one piece of evidence. He had left 3. He had known. He had prepared. He had placed things with the people he trusted and told them to wait because he understood that the truth needed multiple paths and multiple carriers, and that the people who wanted to suppress it would be looking for one source and not 3. He had been a soldier and a strategist and a father, and he had done all three things at once in the last 3 days of his life. She pressed her hand flat against the hospital corridor wall. "Tell Reyes," she said, and her voice was steady. "Tell him that the right person is on her way." She flew to Portland on the first available flight out of Las Vegas. It was a short flight, less than 2 hours. She sat in the window seat and she kept her hands flat on her thighs. And she did not sleep, and she did not read, and she did not look at her phone except once at the 40-minute mark when Howell sent a text that said simply, "Mercer is talking." She stared at that for a moment. 2 words. The walls had not just closed, they had collapsed entirely, and the people inside them were now doing what people do when there is no longer anything to protect. They were talking, each one faster than the last, each one offering more than the one before, because in a collapsing structure, the only currency left is information, and the only question is who spends it first. She put the phone away and looked out the window and thought about her father. She had spent 4 years thinking about him in a specific way, as the mission, as the reason, as the organizing principle of everything she'd done and everywhere she'd gone and every identity she'd worn and discarded. She had thought about him as the person who needed to be vindicated. She had not let herself think about him too often as simply her father, because that version of the grief was the one that had the power to stop her, and she could not afford to be stopped. She let herself think about him that way now. She thought about Sunday morning phone calls. She thought about the way he laughed, which was always a half-second delayed, like he was checking first to make sure the thing was actually funny before he committed to it. She thought about the letter he had written 3 days before he died, which she had memorized so completely that she could feel the weight of each sentence, the way you feel the weight of something you've been carrying for years. She thought about a 23-year-old medic named David Reyes and a box or a file or whatever physical form her father's last message had taken, sitting in a veterans clinic in Portland for 4 years waiting. Her father had trusted 3 people: Whitmore, who had filed a formal complaint and paid for it professionally and kept going anyway; Reyes, who had filed a witness statement and lost his career for it; and her. 3 carriers, 3 paths, the same truth. He had known that one path might fail. He had known that 2 might fail. He had built in redundancy the way you build in redundancy in the field, because her father had understood in his bones that any single point of failure in a critical system was 1 point too many. She landed in Portland at 6:20 p.m. Reyes had given Howell the clinic address. It was in a part of Portland that had been industrial and was now the kind of neighborhood that hadn't fully decided what it wanted to become. Old brick buildings, newer storefronts, a coffee shop that had been there for 30 years, next to one that had been there for 6 months. The Veterans Clinic was on the ground floor of a converted warehouse. The sign was plain, no decoration, just the name and a phone number. She pushed the door open. The waiting room was empty at this hour. A woman at the reception desk looked up and started to say they were closed, and then looked more carefully at Emma's face, and whatever she saw there made her pick up the phone instead and say quietly, "Dr. Reyes, she's here." David Reyes came through a door at the back of the waiting room. I was 31 years old, which made him look young to her, even though the gap between them was only 4 years, because the years he had carried were visible on him. Not in a broken way, in the way that certain kinds of weight shape a person. They stand differently, they move differently, they have a quality of stillness that younger people don't have, because they haven't learned yet that stillness costs something and is worth paying for. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Emma Carter," he said. "David Reyes," she said. He nodded once, then he said, "I watched the news this morning. Hayes Mercer." He paused. "I've been watching the news for 4 years waiting for those names." "They're in custody," she said. Something moved through him. His shoulders changed, not relief exactly, but the physical equivalent of a breath that has been held for so long, the person has stopped noticing they're holding it. "Come in," he said. His office was small and functional. Medical textbooks, a desk covered in patient files, a whiteboard with a schedule on it. On the wall, almost hidden between 2 filing cabinets, a photograph, a unit, photo, the kind taken in deployment, everyone in the same gear. Everyone serious, because you were always serious in deployment photos, even when you were 23 and thought you were going to live forever. She looked at the photo. He saw her looking. "3rd group," he said. "Mali deployment. That was taken 6 weeks before your father died. She found her father in the photograph. It took her only a second because she knew his posture from 1,000 other photographs. The way he held himself, the particular set of his shoulders. He was in the back row. He was not smiling. He was looking directly at the camera with the expression she recognized as his serious face, the one he wore when something mattered. He looks like he already knew, she said. I don't know if he knew, Reyes said, but he was different in those last weeks. Focused in a specific way. Not scared, your father wasn't scared, but alert, like a man who has spotted something in the distance and is waiting to see if it moves. She turned away from the photograph. Tell me, she said, tell me what happened. From your position, what you saw. He sat down behind his desk. She sat across from him, and he told her. He told her about the operation that wasn't on any official schedule, the one that came down through a non-standard channel 3 days before it executed. He told her about the Atlas defense representative who had been embedded with the unit for 2 weeks prior, a man whose name he'd given in his witness statement, and which she now knew was connected directly to Mercer. He told her about the conversation he'd witnessed between her father and that representative, partly heard and partly lip-read, because he'd been on the far side of a vehicle and hadn't wanted to interrupt. Her father had shown the representative a document. The representative had looked at it. He had not reacted the way someone reacts when they are surprised. He had reacted the way someone reacts when they have been shown something they already knew existed and had been hoping would stay lost. Then he'd walked away and made a phone call. Her father had watched him make the call. And then he had come over to where Reyes was working on equipment, and he had said quietly without looking directly at him, Reyes, I need you to hold something for me. Reyes stopped talking. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He took out a sealed envelope, the kind of envelope used for official military documents. Heavy paper, reinforced seams, her father's handwriting on the front. 2 words, for Emma. She looked at it. Her hands were completely still. He said to give it to you directly, Reyes said. He said, don't mail it, don't scan it, don't let anyone photograph it. Put it in her hands. He said you'd know when the time was right because the time would announce itself. He paused. I didn't know what that meant for 4 years. This morning I understood. She reached out and took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. There was more than paper inside, something flat and rigid. She pressed her thumb against the outside and felt the edges of what felt like a compact drive or a memory card encased in something protective. She looked at the envelope in her hands. For Emma. His handwriting. The same handwriting that had written the letter she'd received the week after the notification. The same pen pressure, the same way he made the capital E slightly angular, leading into the rest of the name with a decisiveness that was entirely characteristic of everything he did. He said something else, Reyes said. She looked up. Reyes looked at his desk, then at her. He said she's going to want to open it alone. Give her time before you ask what's in it. He paused. I figure that means you should probably open it alone. I'll be outside. He stood up and walked out of his own office and closed the door behind him. She sat alone. She looked at the envelope for a long time. 30 seconds, maybe longer. She was not delaying. She was preparing in the way her father had taught her to prepare, fully, deliberately, knowing what was about to happen and being ready for it rather than letting it find you unprepared. Then she opened it. Inside was a compact drive sealed in a waterproof casing, and inside with it folded twice was a single sheet of paper. She unfolded the paper first. It was not a long document. It was not an official report or a formal statement. It was handwritten in the same handwriting as the envelope, and it was dated 3 days before he died, 3 days before Molly. It said, Emma, if you're reading this, then the official story didn't hold. I knew it might not. I knew that what I found was going to make certain people do certain things, and that some of those things might be aimed at me. I want you to know that I went in with my eyes open. I want you to know that I understood the risk, and I chose to go forward because some things are worth going forward for, even when the cost is high. I taught you that. I meant it. The drive contains everything. Financial records, communication logs, the documentation of the technology transfer, and the names of the people who authorized it. It is complete. It is verified. I spent 8 months building it carefully because I knew it had to be airtight or it would never hold. I kept 3 copies. This is the one I trust most because I'm trusting it to you. There is one more thing. The man who gave the order is not just Hayes. Hayes is the instrument. There is someone above Hayes in the financial structure who we have not been able to identify. The documentation on the drive gets you to Hayes and to Mercer and to the Molly connection. The person above them is in the drive too, but only partially. There is a name, an account number, a single transaction record from 6 years ago. It is not enough on its own to convict, but it is enough to know where to look. I am sorry for what this is going to cost you. I am not sorry I did what I did. I hope someday you can hold both of those things at the same time. I love you. You were always my best work. Dad. She sat very still for a very long time. The clinic was quiet. She could hear Reyes somewhere outside the office moving around, giving her time the way her father had known she would need time. She could hear distant street sounds, normal sounds, the sounds of a city that did not know what had just happened in a small office on the ground floor of a converted warehouse. She read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully, the exact same folds, and put it back in the envelope. She looked at the drive in her hand. A person above Hayes, she had not known about this. In 4 years and all the evidence she'd assembled and all the paths she'd traced, she had never found a layer above Hayes. She had always believed Hayes was the top of the structure. The principal, the man who gave orders and didn't answer to anyone. She had been wrong. She put the drive carefully in the inside pocket of her jacket, zipped it closed, pressed her hand against it once, feeling the outline of it through the fabric. Then she opened the office door. Reyes was standing in the waiting room. He looked at her when she came out, and he didn't ask what was in the envelope. He had promised her father he wouldn't. "Thank you," she said. "He was a good man," Reyes said simply. "The best I ever knew," she said. He nodded. "Are you going to be all right?" She thought about that, the real version of the question, not the reflexive social version. She thought about what all right meant after 4 years in a firefight, in a dead woman standing, and a letter from her father in a drive containing the names of the people who had killed him. "Not today," she said, "but I think eventually, yes." He nodded again. "If you need a medic somewhere down the line," he said and almost smiled, "you know where to find one." She looked at him, at the unit photograph on the wall, at the clinic around her, the waiting room chairs, the reception desk, the sign on the door. A 23-year-old medic who had filed a witness statement and lost his career and built something new in the space that opened up. "My father chose the right person," she said. Reyes looked at the floor. "He did that a lot," he said quietly. "He was very good at knowing who people were." She walked out of the clinic into the Portland evening. She called Howell from the sidewalk. "I have the drive," she said. A pause. "The documentation your father assembled. All of it and something else. There's a layer above Hayes, a name and an account number and a transaction record. It's not complete, but it's a starting point." Silence. A specific kind of silence. The kind that happens when an investigator realizes the case they thought was complete has just opened another door. "How confident are you in the documentation?" Howell asked. "My father spent 8 months building it," she said. "I am completely confident." "I need that drive tonight," he said. "I know. Where do you need me?" 40 minutes later, she was in a federal field office in Portland, sitting across from 2 forensic analysts who were making verified copies of the drive under chain of custody protocol. And Howell was on speakerphone, and the room had that particular electric quality that happens when people who have been working on something for a longer time suddenly have the final piece in their hands and can feel the whole shape of the thing for the first time. The senior analyst, a woman in her 40s named Park, looked up from the screen after 20 minutes and said, "This is remarkable." "What do you have?" Howell asked over the phone. "The financial documentation is complete and verified," Park said. "Transaction records, communication logs, the Atlas subsidiary chain, the Molly operation financing, and the partial on the unknown above Hayes." She stopped, looked at the screen again. "The account number traces to a private banking institution in Luxembourg. The transaction record is from 6 years ago. One transfer, $4.2 million. The name on the receiving end of that account is..." She stopped again. Emma watched Park's face. Park said, "I need to verify this." "Verify it," Howell said. Silence while Park typed. The room was very quiet. Emma noticed that both forensic analysts had gone very still, in the way that people go still when they've found something that reorders their understanding of what they're looking at. Park looked up. "The account belongs to a senator," she said. Nobody spoke. Senator Richard Callaway, Park said, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that can only be generated by information of a certain magnitude. Information that doesn't just close a case but opens up the entire underlying architecture of how something corrupt has been allowed to function for years without intervention. Callaway had been on the Armed Services Committee for 9 years. He had oversight of the exact defense contracting programs that Atlas Defense Systems operated under. He had the authority to reclassify investigations, to redirect oversight resources, to determine which complaints were pursued and which were quietly filed away in archives labeled unreliable. He was the reason the walls around Hayes had held for 6 years. How was the reason Daniel Carter's report had been buried in 72 hours? He was the reason Emma had been erased, not just Hayes, not just Mercer, a United States senator with a $4.2 million reason to make sure the truth stayed buried. Emma put both hands on the table. Howell's voice came over the speaker, carefully controlled. Park, I need that verified 3 times before it goes anywhere. Chain of custody is perfect, documentation is preserved. Nobody talks outside this room until I give the word. Understood, Park said. Emma, Howell said. I'm here, she said. Your father found this 6 years ago, Howell said. He was trying to document the full chain and ran out of time. He got far enough, she said. He got us to the door. We're going in, Howell said. This is going to take time. Callaway has lawyers and connections and protections that Hayes didn't have. This is months, not days. I know, she said. Are you ready for months? She thought about 4 years. She thought about Montana and borrowed trucks and names that weren't hers and Sunday morning phone calls that no longer came. She thought about a letter that ended, I love you. You were always my best work. I've been ready, she said. I've been waiting 4 years to be ready. 3 weeks later, she met with Ryan Mitchell. They met in a diner in Nevada Neutral Ground, the kind of place where the coffee was bad and the booths were good and nobody was going to bother them. Mitchell was already there when she arrived. He stood up when she came in, which she hadn't expected, and she wasn't sure why it caught her off guard until she realized that it was a gesture of respect, and she hadn't been on the receiving end of that particular gesture in a long time. They sat down. He looked at her across the table for a moment. She looked back. I've been thinking about what to say to you for 3 weeks, he said, and I still don't have it figured out. You don't have to have it figured out, she said. I handed you my rifle, he said. Yes. I handed you my rifle and I still didn't know who you were. You knew what I could do, she said. That was enough for the moment. He looked at his coffee, then back at her. Aldrich is good. He's going to be good. Torres already complaining about physical therapy, which his doctors say means he's going to be fine. I know, she said. Howell keeps me updated. The team wants to meet you, Mitchell said. Formally, all 32 of them. He stopped, started again. When you find out the person who saved your life was operating under a false identity and has been officially dead for 2 years, and her father was killed by the same people who set up the operation you were running, it takes some time to process. I know, she said. Are you willing to meet them? She thought about 32 operators who had spent 3 days barely noticing her, who had looked past her and through her and around her because she was support staff, because she was small, because she was quiet, because nothing about the packaging announced what was inside. She thought about her father saying the truth doesn't always arrive wearing a uniform. Sometimes you have to carry it in something less obvious. Yes, she said, I'm willing. Mitchell nodded, then he said, I owe you an apology. You don't, she said. I do, he said, not for not knowing. I couldn't have known. But for he stopped. You were invisible because we made you invisible, because it was easier to see what we expected to see. She looked at him. Petty Officer Mitchell, she said, you handed me your rifle when every instinct in your training was probably telling you not to. You made a decision with incomplete information because the situation required a decision. That's not something you need to apologize for. That's exactly what it looks like to do the job right. He was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do now? He asked. She had been asked that question several times in the past 3 weeks by several different people, and she had given several different answers depending on context. She gave Mitchell the honest one. There's still work to do, she said. The investigation is ongoing. There's a name at the top of the structure that we're building a case on. That's going to take time. And after, she considered. I don't know, she said. I've been running toward something for 4 years. I haven't thought much about what comes after you reach it. You could come back, he said carefully, formally. There are programs, your background, your skills, the program that was shut down. There are people who are looking at reinstating the classification structure around it. Howell mentioned your name. She looked at him. Howell mentioned my name, she said. Several times, Mitchell said. She sat with that. She thought about being 17 on a range in Virginia. She thought about a father who believed precision could save lives and had spent his career trying to prove it. She thought about what it had cost him and what it had earned her, and whether the cut was the kind that stopped you or the kind that clarified you. Tell Howell I'll think about it, she said. Mitchell almost smiled. 2 months after Black Ridge, Senator Richard Callaway resigned from the Senate Armed Services Committee, citing personal health concerns. The official statement was brief and carefully worded. 3 days later, federal investigators announced that a grand jury had been convened to examine evidence related to financial relationships between certain members of Congress and private defense contractors. Callaway's name is not in the announcement. It didn't need to be. Victor Hayes was indicted on 11 counts. The trial was expected to last 6 months. Lawrence Mercer pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and agreed to full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation confirmed and extended the financial chain that Daniel Carter had first documented 6 years earlier. Robert Pace received a reduced charge structure. He was the first to talk, and he talked completely, and the law blunt instrument that it is recognized the difference between first and last, even when the underlying acts were the same. James Whitmore was released from Valley Medical Center on a Tuesday morning, walked out under his own power, and told the federal agent assigned to escort him that he didn't need an escort, he needed a decent cup of coffee and a phone call with Emma Carter. He got both. David Reyes continued running his clinic in Portland. He declined multiple interview requests from journalists who found his name in the investigation records. He sent Emma one text when Callaway's resignation was announced. It said, "Your father would have been satisfied with this." She read it and sat with it for a long time, and then wrote back, "He would have said, it's a start." Reyes replied, "He would have been right." The NSA analyst named Diane was located in November, living under an assumed identity in Vermont. And she was alive. She had been running for 2 years. When investigators reached her, the first thing she said was, "I've been waiting for someone with enough to protect me." The second thing she said was, "Emma Carter, is she involved?" When they told her yes, she said, "Then I'll talk." 3 more pieces of documentation came out of Diane's files. The case expanded. The grand jury expanded with it. Emma was present for none of the public proceedings. She had given her formal statement. She had turned over the drive. She had done what she came to do. In the machinery of justice, slow, imperfect, frustratingly procedural, but ultimately real, was doing the rest. She went back to the mountains, not to hide, not to disappear. She went back because she had grown up near mountains, and she thought better near them, and she had a decision to make that required clear thinking. Howell called her on a Thursday morning. "The reinstatement package is ready," he said, "if you want it." "What does it look like?" she asked. He described it. A new classification structure for the reconnaissance program. A formal restoration of her records. Her real name in official systems attached to her actual history. No more dead woman in the database. No more Emma Reed in a borrowed truck in Montana. Emma Carter in full. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "The name at the top, Callaway's replacement on the committee. Has anyone looked at who's been nominated?" A brief pause. "Why, Paul?" "Because Hayes had 6 years of protection from a committee chairman," she said. "Before we assume the structure is clean, we should look at who's stepping into the position." Another pause. Then Howell said, "I'll have someone look at it." "Good," she said. "Then yes, send me the package." She stood at the edge of the mountain she'd chosen, and she looked out at a distance that had no end. She could see, and she thought about her father teaching her to breathe before a shot, and she thought about what he'd written in the letter. The truth doesn't always arrive wearing a uniform. Sometimes you have to carry it in something less obvious. She had carried it in a medical bag, in a borrowed identity, in 4 years of patience that had cost her nearly everything. She had carried it exactly the way he knew she would, and she had delivered it. The 32 operators who had underestimated her were the first people to stand up for her publicly when the story became known. Ryan Mitchell gave a single interview, one which he'd agreed to only because the journalist was a veteran who would not sensationalize it. And in that interview, he said something that became the sentence most often quoted when people talked about what had happened at Black Ridge. He said, "We didn't underestimate her because she was small, or because she was quiet, or because she carried medical supplies instead of weapons. We underestimated her because we hadn't earned the right to understand what we were looking at yet. She didn't need us to understand. She just needed the moment to come. And when it came, she was ready. She had always been ready." Emma read that interview on a Tuesday morning. She read it the same way she read everything important, carefully, completely, without rushing. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. Because the case wasn't finished. Because there was still a name at the top of a structure that hadn't fully collapsed yet. Because her father had believed the truth was worth carrying, even when it cost everything, and she was her father's daughter. And she had never once in her life been able to look at an unfinished thing and walk away from it. She had waited 4 years. She was not done yet. But for the first time in 4 years, she was not waiting alone. And that made all the difference.